I'm a primary care doctor. I work at the Bronx VA, see patients there, and also at Elmhurst Hospital. And vaccines are something that I really enjoy talking about with my patients and counseling them on. It's also an important tool in helping keep them safe. I'm also a public health and preventive medicine fellow right now, so it's something that I think about a lot on the research side of things. So in order to talk about how vaccines work, it's really important to have a general understanding of our immune system. I think of our immune system as having two lines of defense. The first one is our physical barriers. So our bodies are constantly being exposed to harmful pathogens or organisms. I'm going to use those two words interchangeably, are things like bacteria, viruses like COVID, parasites, or fungi that can cause disease and illness in us. Our first line of defense is our skin, literally keeps out pathogens from entering our bodies, our mucus and cilia. So mucus, we think of our nose that keeps organisms out of our body, but also we have mucus lining our respiratory tract. So it might be a little bit small, but you can see the lungs in this bottom figure. We have in our airways mucus that serves to trap bacteria or viruses. And then we have these cilia, which are these like tiny hairs that are able to move in a coordinated motion and actually clear out the bacteria once it gets trapped in the mucus, which is pretty cool. So we either cough it up or sometimes it can get like flushed into the stomach where our stomach acid can destroy whatever the pathogen is. Obviously, sometimes our first line of physical barrier defense does not do the job and pathogens do enter our body and our bloodstream. At that point, our immune system is triggered. I'll talk a little bit about our immune system and then how that helps us create vaccines. So first, I wanted to just talk about what an antibody is. Basically, it's a protein that our body produces in response to a pathogen coming into our body. So there's many ways we can get sick. We can get sick through transmission of blood, of secretions, respiratory droplets in the air if someone else is like sneezing near us. So once the bacteria or the virus, whatever the pathogen is, gets introduced to our body, our immune system recognizes that there's this like foreign invader. It'll spring into action and make an antibody in order to fight against the pathogen. When a new pathogen or disease enters our body, it introduces a new antigen. Antigens are really important in this concept of vaccines. I'm going to use the example of the measles, which is the little pink dot on the corner of the screen. So the whole circle is the organism, and then the antigen is the little caret or triangle on the side of the organism. And this antigen, this little thing that projects out from the organism, is actually what triggers the antibody and the immune response. So the antibodies that are made are very specifically made to target this antigen and recognize it and then destroy it. So in the case of if we have a new pathogen that our body has not seen yet before, we have no antibody. And then there's this window of usually when we're feeling sick or symptomatic before our body has the time to make the specific antibody to kill the pathogen. And that's when we're feeling ill. And that's where the vaccines come in. So next up, a vaccine is a tiny and weakened non-dangerous fragment of the organism. So like the bacteria or the virus that includes part of an antigen. So this antigen is just a little part of that organism that causes disease, but it's enough so that our body can recognize it, see that it's a foreign agent, and then build a specific antibody against it. That way, later, when the body is reintroduced to the antigen, like in real life, say someone actually has the flu and they spread those flu particles to you, your body already has this antibody ready to recognize the flu and to defeat it. And so these are other examples of how we use antigens in vaccines to prime our body and get it ready for when it actually meets the real disease. So on the circle that's all green, that's the disease-causing organism, so the bacteria or the virus. In the middle is the organism, but it's actually not the organism, it's just the antigen. This vaccine is just introducing that little tiny part of the organism to create the antibodies in our body. And then the other scenario of different type of vaccine that we give to people is we give the entire disease-causing organism, but we're able to make it really weak and not strong enough to actually cause disease in our bodies, just strong enough so that our bodies see it, react, and create antibodies against it. So as a result, vaccines cause us to create antibodies so that when we do encounter diseases, we're protected. And this protection It might mean that we don't get the disease at all, the infection at all, or it might mean that we get a less severe form of the infection. We look for both of those things in terms of a vaccine and its efficacy. Another concept within vaccination and mass vaccinations is that there are certain members of our community that are not able to receive vaccines, and that might be because they have a weakened immune system. There's several reasons that certain people, it's not safe for them to get vaccines. But if we vaccinate enough of the entire community, then it keeps the levels of that disease and infection so low that it protects the people who aren't able to get vaccinated. So it's really a community effort. And I like to think of getting vaccinated not just for myself, but for other people in my community and my family that I want to protect. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about vaccine development. There are many steps to vaccine development. I tried to touch on the main ones. I'm going to talk about research and discovery, proof of concept, testing the vaccine, and then approving the vaccine. So this first phase, this research and discovery stage, is where researchers are in a laboratory and they're just exploring ideas for potential vaccines. This is really time intensive, resource intensive. It takes usually around 10 to 15 years of laboratory-based research to come up with vaccines that are ready to test in animals and humans. At this point, there is no testing in any organisms. It's just laboratory work. And then this is usually done at a private company or like within private industry with collaboration from researchers at a university. The next stage is called proof of concept. This is when, if all went well with the research and discovery phase, researchers take this vaccine and test it on small animals like mice. Mice actually share a really significant portion of their genome, their DNA with us. So they make really good test subjects. They experience similar diseases that we do, like cancer, heart disease. They seem very different than us, but they're actually great models to test whether vaccines work and whether they're safe. At this stage, adjustments may be made to make the vaccine more effective. What we look for in an effective vaccine is protection against getting the infection, but also protection against severe symptoms from the infection. And that can include hospitalization and, of course, death. We want to see a decrease in all of those after the vaccine. And then the next step after this would be, if all goes well here and there aren't significant safety concerns, and if it seems like the vaccine is effective, then we go on and start clinical trials to test the vaccine in people. This is a bird's eye view of the different phases of clinical trials. So clinical trials means that we're testing it in people. There's phase 1, 2, 3, and then phase 4 is once it hits the general population after it's been approved. The biggest difference between the phases is the amount of people that are included in the phase. In order to start the clinical trials, researchers have to submit data from their animal studies. They have to submit data on manufacturing technology, so making sure that they could actually produce this vaccine and produce it safely. So make sure that each batch of the vaccine has the required ingredients and quality material. And they submit all of this in an application to the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which is a federal agency. The FDA's responsibility is to make sure that all this information or data that they're getting from researchers is correct, and they're responsible for making sure that the vaccine is safe to roll out and to give to the US population. Once the FDA gives approval to begin the clinical trials, we move on to phase 1. Phase 1 is all about safety, really. It's usually around 20 to 80 participants included, and they're monitoring for any side effects in those individuals. If there's no significant side effects, then they move on to phase 2, where it's a slightly larger population. So it's 100 to 300 participants. Here they're looking at vaccine efficacy, making sure it actually works in preventing disease, looking at what dosages are appropriate for patients, and then also monitoring for side effects. And then phase 3 is a larger version of the same process where they're looking at safety, efficacy, but in up to 3,000 participants. And obviously you want to choose participants that are reflective of the population that you're going to give the vaccine to. So if this is a vaccine for people above 60, the participants wouldn't include children. And the idea is to try to make the participants as diverse as the general population would be who is receiving the vaccine, which is really important. After phase 3, it undergoes FDA review. So the FDA looks at all of this data and weighs the safety, any side effects that were noted, and the efficacy of the vaccine, if it really works and helps a significant portion of the individuals who got it, and will approve or deny the vaccine from moving forward into the general population. If the FDA gives their approval, then it moves on to phase 4. Phase 4 means that you or I, we're not in the clinical trial, we can get the vaccine, but the FDA is still monitoring great numbers of the population who are getting the vaccine to just look for side effects. deaths on this much larger level. Just wanted to give some historical examples of vaccines. They haven't been around for too long. They've made such amazing advancements in public health and safety. One of the most celebrated vaccines and vaccine stories is the polio virus. So this is a virus that attacks the nervous system. It can lead to spinal and respiratory paralysis, so paralysis of our muscles that help our lungs breathe in air. It causes death, and this is in some cases, and this mostly affected younger children. It's been around forever, but it was a big problem in the early 1900s. In New York City in 1916, polio killed over 2,000 people. And then the worst recorded US outbreak was in 1952, and that killed over 3,000 people. By 1950, 2 effective vaccines were developed for polio. And by the 1980s, a global mass vaccination campaign had begun to try to get everyone protected against polio. It was a really significant success. Since then, polio cases have decreased around the world by more than 99%. And there's only a few countries today that still have cases of polio. And this is a more recent example of a vaccine that was developed and that we're happy about. And that's the RSV vaccine. RSV stands for respiratory syncytial virus. It causes serious illness in older adults in the US, but also in babies too. It's responsible for 60 to 160,000 hospitalizations every year, and sometimes up to 10,000 deaths per year. You have a higher risk of getting more sick from RSV if you have chronic disease like heart or lung disease, or if your immune system is weakened. Some examples of heart or lung disease would be like if you had COPD or congestive heart failure. So this vaccine that was developed was administered for the first time several years ago, is for adults over 60, and it protects against severe illness. We have 2 different vaccines available, but it's a single dose for each one, whichever one you choose to get or whatever one's available to you. And you can get the vaccine even if you've had RSV in the past. So the first brand name of the vaccine is called Arexvy, and 1 dose was 83% effective at preventing severe disease from RSV. Abrysvo is the other vaccine, and that was 89% effective at preventing severe disease from RSV. So this is really exciting. We're using it in pregnant moms and babies as well, because those are another population that is really affected significantly by RSV. And there's been great results with that too. Just a reminder about another respiratory illness that can cause severe disease, but also it can cause long COVID. People who are at risk for long COVID are those who have not had a COVID vaccine, who have gotten very sick from COVID, or have underlying health conditions. Some common symptoms are coughing or breathing problems, loss of smell or change in taste, brain fog, fever, fatigue, mood changes. There is a QR code with more information and resources, but you can also talk to your primary care provider if you think this sounds like you, and ask them for more information on next steps. And then just one last plug for vaccines. Thankfully, I think we're past flu vaccine administration at this point in this season, and it seems like the flu rates are going down, but it was a really bad winter for flu. So definitely make sure if you didn't get it this year to get it next season when it becomes available again in the fall. Same for COVID. Make sure you're up to date with your COVID shot and boosters. RSV we talked about, and then the pneumonia vaccine is 1 dose for all adults over 65, and you may qualify for a dose of the pneumonia shot if you are below 65 but have certain health conditions that place you at higher risk for pneumonia.
Just a reminder that we are lucky to have this kind of technology available to us. Make use of it. I know we say this every time, but it really is true. And I think some of the things that are coming up in the news about people who are unvaccinated getting sick is just a good reminder that we have this available to us.
People in the 1800s would be so surprised and grateful,
that this is here.
Impressed that we have so many vaccines, and our life expectancy and from these preventable infectious diseases is so much better compared to that time because of vaccines.